They laughed. My own parents. Mom covering her mouth like it was some inside joke. Dad shaking his head in mock pity. $10? He whispered loud enough for the whole room to hear. I sat there frozen, my face burning and my palms trembling, in a room full of smirks. The lawyer had just read my name. That was it. To Dana Harper, $10. No explanation, no apology, just $10. I wasn't surprised by the silence that followed. What did I expect? A lavish inheritance? A family that recognized my worth? No. The cruel chuckles of relatives who had always treated me like an afterthought were far more familiar. They saw me as a joke, someone who didn't belong in their perfect world of business suits and glossy photos of success. But then, just as I was beginning to shrink, feeling that familiar sting of being nothing more than a side character in my own life, Mr. Whitaker, the attorney, cleared his throat. Actually, he said, adjusting his glasses, there is a private letter addressed only to Dana. The room fell deathly silent. And for the first time that day, I saw fear flicker in my parents' eyes. They had no idea what was coming. Neither did I. The silence was thick, the kind that presses against your skin, making everything seem far too real. I held my breath as Mr. Whitaker carefully placed a thick cream-colored envelope in front of me. My grandfather's handwriting was unmistakable, though it had been years since I'd seen it. For you, Dana, Mr. Whitaker said, his voice softer now, more respectful, almost as though he knew how heavy this moment was. I reached for the envelope, my fingers shaking ever so slightly. The weight of it seemed symbolic, like it carried more than just words. It carried all the years I had been dismissed, the years I had spent chasing something that no one understood. I hesitated, the air thick with expectation. Was this a cruel joke? Was it another way for my grandfather to remind me of how far removed I was from the legacy of the Harper family? But when I finally opened it, the words inside took me completely by surprise. I needed them to show you who they really are when they thought you were powerless, the letter began. I know it hurt, Dana, but I needed you to see them for what they are. I felt my heart hammer in my chest. My grandfather had known all along. He had known the pain I had endured, the mocking, the constant comparison to my brother Lucas, the constant feeling of not being good enough. He had watched me struggle with my place in the family, and now, in his final moments, he had left me something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. And then, as I read further, the truth began to emerge. The letter detailed everything I had never known. The money, the gallery, the trust, it was all mine. Not just the $10 inheritance that had been read aloud, but the real legacy, the one no one else had access to. I leave you the Harper Creative Trust, Dana. 70% of the holdings. Full control over the foundation. A private studio on Beacon Street. It's yours. This is my legacy to you. Not because you are my heir, but because you have vision. You are the one who will continue what I started, what I built. I stopped reading for a moment, trying to make sense of it all. This was real. My grandfather had left me everything. The money, the power, the legacy. He hadn't left it to Lucas. He hadn't left it to my parents. He had left it to me, the one who had always been an outsider, the one who had never been part of their perfect, pre-planned world. And as I sat there, holding the letter, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. I had finally been seen. Not as the daughter who didn't fit in. Not as the rebel. Not as the failure. But as someone with real worth. Someone who could do more than just follow the family's rules. Someone who could build something new. I looked up at Mr. Whitaker, who was watching me intently. He didn't speak right away, giving me time to absorb the weight of what had just been revealed. Well, Dana, he finally asked, are you ready to take the next step? I looked down at the letter again. My grandfather's words etched in ink, his belief in me more powerful than any inheritance. This wasn't just money. This was power. This was the chance to shape my own future, to step out from the shadows of my family and finally create something that was truly mine. I stood up slowly, the letter still in my hands. I didn't need to answer Mr. Whitaker's question right away. I knew what I had to do. I had to take control. I had to live up to my grandfather's expectations. And in doing so, I would prove to everyone, including myself, that I was worthy of the legacy he had left me. I left the law office with the weight of the letter still pressing on my chest, but with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The streets of the city seemed different, somehow. The people bustling around me were unaware of the shift that had just occurred in my life. To them, I was just another person, lost in the crowd. But I knew better. I wasn't just anyone anymore. I held the letter close, clutching it tightly, as if it were a lifeline. My grandfather had given me more than just an inheritance. He had given me permission. Permission to be who I was. Permission to take what had always been denied to me. I knew the next step wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about carving out my place in a world that had always tried to define me in ways that didn't fit. For years, I had fought against my family's expectations, their rules, their rigid vision of who I should be. And now, for the first time, I had the power to change all of that. The studio on Beacon Street. The Harper Creative Trust. 70% of the holdings. It was all mine, a dream I had never dared to hope for, let alone expect.
But it was real now.
And I wasn't going to waste it. I couldn't go back to the life I had before. The barista shifts. The sketchbooks filled with dreams no one cared about. The endless rejection from my parents. It was over. The moment I stepped into that studio, I knew it would be the start of something new. Something entirely mine. When I arrived at Beacon Street later that evening, the building seemed to watch me. It wasn't a grand mansion or an imposing office tower, but there was something undeniably powerful about it. It was a space that had the potential to be transformed into anything I wanted. A gallery. A sanctuary for my art. A space where I could finally be who I had always known I could be. Inside, the walls were bare, waiting for something, waiting for me. I stood in the middle of the empty space, looking around. It wasn't much yet, but I could see it. I could already feel the pulse of the place, the energy that would fill the room with creativity and life. This would be my foundation. Not the Harper family's business empire, not the legacy they tried to force on me. This was where I would make my mark. I ran my fingers over the bare walls, imagining them covered in my work. My photographs, my vision, my truth. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need anyone to validate my dreams. But there was still one thing missing. I needed to show them. I needed to show my family that this wasn't just some fleeting moment of rebellion. This wasn't just me throwing my art in their faces. This was me claiming my rightful place in the world. This was me proving to myself, and to them, that I could be more than they ever gave me credit for. It was time to turn this space into something that couldn't be ignored. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind, a blur of decisions, meetings, and late nights spent transforming the studio into something worthy of the legacy I had just inherited. There was no manual for this, no one to guide me. It was just me and the space, and I was determined to make it something real, something that would stand on its own. I didn't need a big team. I didn't need validation from anyone. I just needed to create. I began by poring over the works I had already done, old photographs, images I had taken when no one was watching, when I was still just a dreamer with a camera. I'd always believed they were nothing more than fleeting moments, captured to preserve a piece of the world that was slowly being forgotten. But now, with my grandfather's words in my mind, I realized they were far more than that. They were my truth. Each image told a story of the unnoticed, the forgotten, the invisible. It was what I had always tried to capture, the essence of life that most people overlooked. And now, those stories would finally have a place where they could be seen, a place where they could matter. I hired a small team to help with the renovations, painters, carpenters, technicians, but I remained the creative force. Every decision, from the lighting to the layout, was mine. I wasn't going to take this lightly. This was my chance to build something that would stand as proof of who I was, who I could be. And then came the hard part, the opening, the first real test of everything I had built. It wasn't just about showcasing my work, it was about proving that I could do it, proving to my family, to the world, that this was what I was meant to do. I crafted the invitations with the same care I had put into everything else. Clean, minimal, yet impossible to ignore. This was not just a gallery opening, it was a statement. A declaration that I was no longer just a daughter living in the shadow of my family's expectations. I was Dana Harper, and I was here to stay. I carefully selected a few critics, some art journalists, donors who had supported the vision I was starting to form. But there was one invite I had to send that would be the hardest of all. The one to my family. To my parents, who had never believed in me, who had dismissed me when I was younger. They didn't deserve an invite. But my grandfather's words rang in my ears. You needed to see them for who they really are when they think you have nothing. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to see what I had built. And I wanted them to know that it wasn't because of their approval that I succeeded. It was because of my own belief in myself. The day of the event arrived, and I stood at the entrance of the gallery, my hands trembling slightly. The space was perfect. The lighting soft but deliberate. The photos hung just so. I could feel the weight of every decision I had made in this moment. And then they arrived. My parents, walking into the gallery like they owned it. My mother's pearls gleamed under the lights, her expression that carefully controlled mask of politeness. My father's eyes scanned the room, always calculating, always assessing. They moved through the space, commenting on the work in their usual detached manner. Lucas, trailing behind them, was quieter than usual, his eyes shifting between the art and the people around us. But they didn't see it. Not yet. The room was filling up with people now, all of them speaking in hushed tones about the work, about the concept, about the rawness of the photos. I could feel their admiration, their curiosity. This was my world now. The applause, the recognition, it was all starting to build. But it wasn't for them. It wasn't for my parents or Lucas. It was for me. For my vision. For the chance to finally prove to myself that I was more than just the rebel daughter. I watched them, my family, standing apart from the rest of the guests. Their eyes flickered to the photographs, but they didn't see. They didn't understand. And as the crowd buzzed around them, I realized it didn't matter. They would never understand. Not until they saw what I could do without them. As the evening unfolded, the atmosphere in the gallery shifted. The crowd became more animated, their voices louder, more engaged. The art, my art, was no longer just photographs on walls. It was alive. It was making people feel something. I could see it in their eyes, the curiosity, the questions, the awe. But despite the buzz, despite the success of the opening night, I couldn't shake the feeling of my parents' presence. They were still standing near the back, speaking to some high-profile guests, their voices carrying a mixture of forced politeness and thinly veiled judgment. They hadn't approached me once, not to congratulate me, not to offer any acknowledgement. I wasn't surprised. I knew they would never truly approve. Not the way I wanted them to. Not the way that felt genuine. Their praise would never come with an open heart. It would always be tinged with the need to control, to shape, to mold me into their perfect image of what a daughter should be. But tonight wasn't about them. Tonight wasn't about earning their approval. Tonight was about showing the world and myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet. That I didn't need their legacy, their approval, to make my mark. My mind flickered back to the letter. The words my grandfather had written, urging me not to become them, urging me to stay true to my vision. Don't let them take your eye, Dana. That's your gift and your rebellion. I knew now what he meant. He didn't want me to fight against them just for the sake of it. He wanted me to fight for something greater. He wanted me to fight for the freedom to create, to be who I truly was without the weight of their expectations suffocating me. The final room in the gallery was the last piece of my plan. It was where everything would come full circle, where my family would finally see what I had done. It was a room they hadn't anticipated, one that would make them realize, perhaps for the first time, that I wasn't just playing at this. This was real. This was my inheritance, and it was worth more than they could ever comprehend. The centerpiece of the room was a simple frame. In it, an old check, a $10 check, the one that had been given to me at the reading of my grandfather's will. The same check my parents had mocked. The same check they had thought was a joke. Underneath the frame was a plaque. It read, Sometimes the smallest inheritance is the greatest test. As I watched my family approach the display, I saw their confusion. Their eyes flickered from the check to the plaque and back again. They were trying to make sense of it, to understand the meaning behind this piece of art. But they couldn't. They would never get it. My father stepped forward, his face contorting with disbelief. This is your big statement?" he asked, his voice edged with frustration. "A $10 check." I didn't answer right away. I wanted them to sit with it, to let the truth of it sink in. "I know you don't get it, Dad," I finally said, my voice steady but firm. But that check, that $10 check, was the key to everything. It was the final lesson, the one thing you couldn't control. My mother stood beside him, her arms crossed, her face tight. "You really think this is going to prove something to us?" she asked, her voice cold. I looked at her, taking a deep breath. "It's not for you," I replied quietly. "It's for me. For everyone who thought I wasn't enough." Lucas, still standing a few feet away, spoke up, his voice cautious. "What is this, Dana? A way to rub it in our faces?" I met his gaze, but this time I didn't flinch. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I wasn't afraid of any of them.
"No, Lucas.
It's a way to show you that I don't need your approval. I don't need anyone's approval. Not anymore." The silence that followed was thick. It wasn't uncomfortable for me. It was the kind of silence that follows an undeniable truth. And I could see it in their faces, the confusion, the frustration, the realization that they had underestimated me. They had laughed when I was given $10. But they didn't see the bigger picture. They didn't see what I had built. I didn't need their acceptance. Not anymore. I had my own. The room buzzed with conversation, but I was no longer part of it. My parents stood together, speaking in hushed tones, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My brother, Lucas, looked around the room, unsure of how to react, but for once, I didn't care. I was no longer the outsider in my own family. I had reclaimed my identity. As the night went on, I watched my family interact with the guests, their smiles strained and their voices forced. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to succeed, to rise above their dismissiveness and create something tangible, something real. But I had. And that was something they couldn't take away from me, no matter how much they tried to undermine it. I watched my mother take a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, her eyes scanning the room for someone to impress. My father was deep in conversation with an investor, likely trying to gauge whether this gallery opening was worth their time. But I could tell. I could see the cracks in their facade. They were pretending to be above it all, pretending like they didn't care about my success, but deep down, they were seething. They were jealous. And Lucas? Well, Lucas was trying to play the role of the dutiful son, the one who was supposed to inherit everything. But he couldn't hide his confusion. He couldn't mask his surprise at how far I had come. The same boy who had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, was now looking at me as if I were a stranger. A stranger who had surpassed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. I didn't blame him. For the longest time, I had lived in his shadow. The world had expected me to be him, to be the perfect child, the one who could run the business and make my parents proud. But I never could. And now I didn't have to. As the night drew to a close, I made my way around the gallery, speaking to a few of the critics and guests who had attended. They were impressed by the work, but it was the quiet conversations, the ones that didn't need to be said out loud, that filled me with pride. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need the approval of the people in that room. I had already won. And then, just as I was about to leave, I saw them. My parents, standing in the doorway of the gallery, their faces a mixture of disbelief and pride. They hadn't said a word to me all night, hadn't acknowledged my success, but now, as they stood in the doorway, I saw something different in their eyes. I didn't rush to them. I didn't need to. This was my moment, and they would have to come to terms with it. My father looked at me, his gaze lingering longer than usual. "I never thought you had it in you, Dana," he said, his voice quieter than before. "But this is something. I'll give you that." I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. The words hung in the air, and I let them. After all these years, I didn't need his approval to feel validated. I had already proven to myself what I was capable of. Thank you, I finally said, my voice steady. But I didn't do this for you. Or for anyone else. I did it for me. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, at the center of my own creation. My gallery. My success. I glanced around the room one last time. The space was full of people, of life, of possibility. This was just the beginning. The first step in a journey that was entirely mine. And as I stood there, looking out over the crowd, I realized that for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's approval. I had already built something real. Something that couldn't be taken away. Days passed, and the success of the gallery opening was still fresh in my mind, but I knew that the real work was just beginning. The next steps were crucial. It wasn't enough to simply have the gallery, the trust, or the power. I had to prove that this wasn't a fluke, that I wasn't just some rebellious daughter making a statement for a night. This was my future, my legacy, and I wasn't going to waste it. The studio on Beacon Street became my sanctuary. It wasn't just a physical space, it was where my dreams began to take form. I threw myself into the work, curating exhibitions, selecting pieces, and bringing in new artists who shared my vision. I wanted this place to be more than just a gallery. It had to be a platform for voices that had been ignored, for art that had been overlooked. It had to be a place where the marginalized could finally be seen. I spent hours in the studio, working late into the night, putting together a collection that reflected everything I believed in. The photographs, the installations, the paintings, it was all part of a bigger picture, one that I had been painting for years without even realizing it. My grandfather had believed in me, and now I had to believe in myself, in my ability to build something that was truly meaningful. But the hardest part was dealing with the fallout. My family wasn't done with me yet. The opening had been just a beginning. The real test came when they realized that I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to fall into their world of business deals and mergers. I wasn't going to become what they had always wanted me to be. My mother was the first to reach out, though it was far from a heartfelt attempt. She called, her voice clipped and formal. "Dana, I hope you're doing well. We need to talk. I've been thinking about what happened, and I think it's time we had a conversation about the future." I knew exactly where this was headed. She wanted control. She wanted to bring me back into the fold, to convince me that the family business was where I belonged. But I couldn't go back. I had already moved on. "I'm not interested in discussing the family business, Mom," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm doing exactly what I'm meant to do. And that's not something you can understand." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her thoughts racing. "You don't understand," she said eventually, her tone softer but still edged with frustration. "You can't just throw away the family legacy like this. You're throwing away your future." I didn't need to respond. I had heard it all before. The same old lecture, the same tired arguments. But this time, I wasn't going to let it affect me. I had a future, and it was mine to create, not theirs. "I'm not throwing anything away, Mom. I'm building something. Something that's mine. And that's the future I'm choosing." Her silence on the other end was deafening. But it didn't matter. She had made her choice long ago. And now I had made mine. As I hung up the phone, I realized something. The phone call, though difficult, had marked a turning point. My family wasn't going to accept this easily. They would fight me every step of the way. But that was fine. I had never needed their approval. I had built this for myself, and I wasn't about to let them take it away. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late-night brainstorming sessions. I focused on building the gallery's reputation, on creating something that was impossible to ignore. Word of mouth began to spread. The art community started to take notice. The artists whose work I featured gained recognition. And slowly, my vision was starting to come to life. But there was still something missing. My family's resistance had fueled me, but I couldn't help but wonder how long I could keep this up without facing the inevitable confrontation. I knew that, eventually, they would come for me again. They would try to bring me back into their world. But this time, I wouldn't go willingly. I was ready. And this time, I was going to fight for what was mine. As the months passed, the gallery on Beacon Street became more than just a physical space. It became a symbol. A symbol of defiance, of independence, of everything I had been fighting for. I had built something from nothing, a place where art could breathe and speak freely, without the constraints of family legacy or business expectations. But just as I had expected, my family was not going to sit quietly for long. Their calls had become more frequent, their messages more insistent. I could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of their judgment pushing down on me. They didn't understand what I was doing. They didn't see the vision. And for a moment, I wondered if they ever would. It all came to a head one evening when my mother showed up at the gallery unannounced. I hadn't seen her in weeks, not since our last phone conversation. She had called me a few times after that, but I never answered. I wasn't ready to have that conversation again. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. When I saw her standing at the front door, her arms crossed, her expression rigid, I knew this wasn't going to be a casual visit. She had something to say, something important, something that, I feared, might try to pull me back into their world. "Dana," she said, her voice tight, "we need to talk." I stood still for a moment, considering my options. I could tell her to leave, to stop trying to control my life. But something inside me, something I didn't expect, wanted to listen. Maybe it was the part of me that still cared, despite everything. Or maybe it was just the curiosity of what she had to say. "Come inside," I finally said, stepping aside to let her in. We walked through the gallery in silence, the walls lined with the work of artists whose visions mirrored my own. I could see her glancing at the pieces, but she didn't comment on them. She wasn't here for the art.
She was here for me.
We sat down in the corner of the gallery, the room bathed in the soft glow of the overhead lights. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to speak, but I didn't. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. "You've done well for yourself," she said finally, her voice soft, but there was still that edge to it. "This place, it's impressive. But it's not enough, Dana. You know that, right?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" She sighed, a deep, heavy sigh. "You've built something beautiful, but you're still living in the shadows. You're hiding behind your art. You're hiding from the real world, from the business, from your responsibilities." I could feel the tension building in my chest. I knew where this was headed.
She wanted me to come back.
She wanted me to give up my independence, to become a part of their world again. "I'm not hiding, Mom," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I'm building something. Something real." "You don't understand," she shot back. "You're throwing away your future. This gallery, these photos, they're nice, but they don't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. You're still part of the Harper legacy. You can't just walk away from that." I shook my head, feeling my frustration rise. "I'm not walking away from anything. I'm choosing a different path. A path that I can walk on my own, without anyone telling me what to do." She looked at me, her eyes narrowed, searching my face for something she could control, something she could fix. But there was nothing there. I had made my choice. "You're making a mistake," she said softly, almost pleading. "You don't have to do this alone. You can have everything. The business, the power, the legacy. All you have to do is come back. All you have to do is accept your place in the family." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, but it wasn't from her words. It was from the realization that she would never understand. She would never see what I had seen. She would never see the freedom, the possibility, that came with creating something from nothing. "I don't need their legacy, Mom," I said quietly, looking her straight in the eye. "I don't need anyone's approval. I've built something that's mine. And that's enough for me." The silence between us was thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had been said.
She didn't respond.
She couldn't. She knew, deep down, that I was right. That this was my choice. My path. Finally, she stood up, her expression unreadable. "I don't know if I'll ever understand this," she said, her voice distant. "But I can't keep trying to change you." "I'm not broken, Mom," I said, my voice low but steady. "I don't need fixing." She nodded, a single tear escaping from her eye, but she quickly wiped it away. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Dana." And with that, she walked out of the gallery, leaving me standing in the silence of my own creation. It wasn't the reconciliation I had hoped for, but it was the end of a chapter. The end of trying to fit into a world that wasn't mine. The end of waiting for their approval. And the beginning of everything that was about to come. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The gallery's reputation grew, slowly but surely. More artists reached out, eager to showcase their work alongside mine. The critics began to take notice. The reviews were glowing, their words full of praise for the raw authenticity that the gallery embodied. It wasn't just a space for art, it had become a symbol of defiance, a statement that there was more to success than the traditional paths my family had always championed. But despite the success, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that my family wasn't done with me yet. They hadn't accepted my decision to leave their world behind. My father hadn't called, but I knew the wheels were turning in his mind. I could almost hear the gears of his plans turning, trying to find a way to bring me back into the fold. I knew it was coming. The next confrontation. The next attempt to get me to fall in line. And it came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, I received a call from Mr. Whitaker. His tone was formal, businesslike, but I could hear the underlying tension in his voice. "Dana, I need to meet with you," he said. "It's about the trust and your inheritance. Your parents are requesting a meeting." I froze. My parents. I had expected this, but hearing those words still made my stomach drop. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice steady, but betraying the anxiety I was feeling. "They want to discuss the future of the Harper Creative Trust. They believe the trust is being mismanaged," he said. "They want to meet with you to clarify some things." I knew what this was. They were trying to take control. They had always believed they were the rightful heirs to everything, and now they were attempting to reclaim what they thought was theirs. "I'll meet with you," I said. "But I'm not changing anything. I've built this, and I'm not going to let them take it away." Mr. Whitaker didn't respond right away. I could tell he was trying to choose his words carefully. "Dana, I understand. But this is important. You should consider all your options before making any decisions." I hung up the phone, the weight of the situation settling in. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about control. They wanted to take what was mine, and I wasn't going to let them. The meeting was set for the following week, and I spent the days leading up to it preparing. I went over the trust's documents, reviewing every clause, every stipulation. I had to be ready for whatever they threw my way. I couldn't afford to be blindsided. I had worked too hard, fought too long, to let them take it all away. The day of the meeting arrived, and I walked into the office with my head held high. My parents were already seated at the table, their faces tense, their expressions cold. Lucas was with them, sitting quietly, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. I could feel the tension in the air the moment I walked in. "Dana," my father said, his voice low, almost accusatory. "We need to talk about the future of the Harper Creative Trust." I didn't sit down right away. Instead, I stood there, my gaze sweeping over the room. "I've been managing the trust just fine, thanks," I said, my voice steady. "I don't need your input on how it should be run." My mother shot me a look, the same one she had always given me when she thought I was being difficult. "You don't understand, Dana," she said, her voice tight. "This isn't about control. This is about legacy. The trust is the backbone of the Harper family. It's not meant to be some art project." I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "It's not an art project, Mom. It's a space for real artists. It's a place where people who don't have a voice can be heard. It's a place where I can finally be who I've always been. And you can't take that away from me." My father slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "You're wasting everything we built," he growled. "You think you're some kind of artist, but you're ruining the Harper name. You're throwing away your inheritance, your future." I stood my ground, my posture straight, my eyes unwavering. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said, my voice firm. "I'm taking control of my own life. And if that means stepping away from your legacy, then so be it." There was a long silence as my parents processed my words. The room seemed to close in on me, the weight of their expectations heavy in the air. But I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I had made my decision. I had chosen my path. "You're making a mistake," my mother whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "You'll regret this." I shook my head. "No, I won't. Because this is who I am. This is who I've always been." My father stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. "You'll regret this, Dana," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll see." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The look in my father's eyes told me everything I needed to know. They were never going to accept me for who I was. They were never going to understand. And I was okay with that. As I walked out of the meeting, I realized something. I had won. Not because of the money or the power, but because I had finally freed myself from their control. I had finally taken ownership of my life. And nothing, not even them, could take that away from me.